Welcome to Art Bazaar, a podcast that chats with artists of all types to explore the depths of creativity. Brought to you by the Alternative Gallery. We'll be releasing new episodes every Wednesday, with bonus episodes dropping randomly. If you like what you're hearing, you can support this podcast by going to thealternativegallery.com and clicking on the podcast tab. I'm your host, Brendan Wonder, creative director of the Alternative Gallery, a non-profit arts organization in Allentown, PA, run through the efforts of dedicated volunteers. On this episode of Art Bazaar, we'll be chatting with Christopher Elston, a local photographer and videographer who a couple of years ago took on a very special project that ended up here at the Alternative Gallery. In September 2021, Chris Elston campaigned to save the hand-painted sign from the former location of Beachead Comics on 16th and Chew Streets. This sign, painted in 1985 by artist Tom Wilde, had become iconic to many residents of Allentown. After it faced destruction in late 2021, Chris put together an effort to save the sign and move it to a new permanent location where it could be given new life. While working to save the beloved piece of local history, Chris discovered a much deeper story to the sign than was immediately obvious. During our chat today, we'll peel back the layers of Allentown's hidden history within this sign and the excellent work Chris has done to save it. Chris, welcome to Art Bazaar.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks so much for being here. I know we originally tried to schedule this a couple weeks back, and you were scheduled to be episode number 22. And I know you drive a lot for work. And
Yes.
Being that it was episode 22, I was going to mention how much Route 22 sucks. And if you wanted to defend or agree with that.
I agree with that. I avoid 22 at all costs. I live in Emmaus, right off of near the South Mall. So like I'm near 78, so I just take 78 for everything. 78's not great, but it's much better than 22, so I avoid 22 at all costs.
Yeah, the Alternative Gallery here is located right between the Fullerton Avenue exit and the MacArthur Road exit, so it's like where it gets super, super clogged.
Yeah.
So there's no good way for us to go.
Yeah. I just zigzag through Allentown just to get here.
So speaking of traveling, before we get into the world of signage,
Yes.
you work as a photographer and videographer. Do you want to give us some insight as to what you do?
Sure. I think every year my job changes a little bit. I started out as a photographer for the Express Times and a photographer for some local studios. And as I was doing that, I became the lab tech at the Express Times. So I was working there at night and
In the darkroom.
in the dark room, back with film. So we were in right at the beginning of digital. So I was developing the film for the photographers, drying it, scanning in what they wanted, and then really early version of Photoshop, bringing it in and preparing it for them, and then shooting. Then I got a job at a production company. So I was doing that during the day, photography at night, and kind of quit both of those in 2001. So since 2001, I've been freelancing in photography and video production. So
The rough and beautiful world of freelance, man.
yeah, and hardly anything in the Lehigh Valley. So I'm always traveling.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing up in New York City, aside from the film lab, of course, because that was, by the time I got up there, it was no longer a thing. And when I moved back here to Allentown, that freelance work kind of ceased to exist, and I would still have to go up to New York if I wanted to take jobs.
Right. So that's what I've been doing. And one company I started freelancing with was Clark Media out of Bethlehem, and all their clients were in New York. So then I'd have to go to New York and stuff. So I did a bunch of that, and then, branched out and met a bunch of other people. But of course, like the people I'm meeting are Northern Jersey people and New York people, and a ton of guys from Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. But they all work all over. So I'm either traveling to New York or all over New Jersey, and like in the past 4 or 5 years, it seems like I'm doing a lot of like traveling to other cities. So I'm in Dallas like 4 times in the beginning of this year.
Dallas, Texas?
Yeah.
Wow. And I assume they cover your flights and travel.
Yeah, they cover everything, and
Sweet.
Yeah, so
little
it's-
mini vacation.
I try. Yeah, I'm kind of sick of Dallas now. I was there like 3 or 4 times last year. I'm going to be there 3 or 4 times this year. And like, I've seen all the cool stuff. And I'm like, I want to see something. I want to go back to the Midwest. I really like the Midwest, but I never get any gigs there. I used to work in Chicago, but
Chicago's amazing. That's another place I'm dying to get back to too, man. Maybe we'll go do some production gigs together out there.
Yeah.
So if anyone listening is in Chicago and you have some gigs, throw it our way.
Get us out there. I need to drink a Schlitz and
get
hang out.
some of that deep dish Chicago pizza, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
You know, some people say the only real pizza is in New York. I'm like, come on, man. There's good pizza all over the place.
It's funny. Last time I was there, I was working with a guy that grew up in Chicago, and I think he lives in Nashville or something now. But he's like, "Let me take you to the place," and it was the thin crust, and it was really good. And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know, this place is good." So we didn't get deep dish that last time, but I need to get back there. Yeah, so I drive a lot. Last when I was supposed to do this episode. It was...
you got stuck at a gig, huh?
It just kept going forever. And I'm trying to remember if that was the night. I think the next night we were like still loading the truck at midnight. And I was just like...
Oh, man.
And then I have to come back. Like I like the travel gigs better because I can like... My commute is down the elevator. I'm, stay in a hotel for a week, commute to the elevator, do the gig, and then...
Well, the hotel ones are typically corporate gigs, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes those corporate gigs, you probably don't get to see much, well, at least at times, right?
It depends. It depends on if, like, there's going to be any, like, rehearsals or anything, or we're switching the room around or something like that. But a lot of times, like, hopefully we can get out by, like, 6... because they have stuff to do. They don't want to be in meetings for forever. So
and then you hit the hotel bar.
Yeah, no, I try to get away from the bar. I try to find a dive bar somewhere else, like in town.
Did they give you a per diem?
Yeah, most of them are per diem. Some of them are... You need to have the receipt, and it's like, you can spend $40 or whatever.
And they buy the receipt off you.
Yeah.
I went through that shit, man.
But the per diems are a lot better because like I can skip breakfast, I can skip lunch, or I can find like lunch somewhere free, or maybe and then I have like $75 to like spend on dinner. So
that's what I would do when I have a per diem. I would do the same thing, but I would go buy like books or movies or something like that. That's kind of how I built this collection.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, per diems of the past.
Yeah, and if there's like a museum, or there's like, I've worked in Atlanta a few times last year. I'm like, I'm going to go to the world of Coca-Cola.
Oh, Atlanta is one city I haven't been to yet that I'm really curious to check out.
It's interesting. I mean, every city is kind of is similar, where there is a boom and a bust, and now they're coming back. So I think Atlanta has had problems. Like, they still have the park where the Olympics were.
96.
Yeah. So that's still there. So it's kind of big there.
Well, Atlanta's big problem is they have massive, massive sprawl. It's one of the worst cities in the country for sprawl. Yeah. So they have, it's like 12-lane highways, something fucking ridiculous like that.
Yes.
How fun is that to drive on? That's like 10 22s in one.
That's a good thing about like going places. I don't have to drive.
Yeah, 22 might suck, but it's only 2 lanes most of the drive. So
well, haven't they been talking about trying to make it 3 lanes for?
Yeah,
30 years.
These engineers keep shooting themselves in the foot. They think the solution for traffic is to create more lanes, when all that does is create more traffic.
Right.
And there's been all these studies done. If you want to deal with traffic, you make it more difficult to drive, not easier.
Right. I heard a study too where it was like, if something goes from 3 lanes to 2 or 2 lanes to 3, you get the same amount of traffic. Like anything that changes causes a slowdown.
Yes. So, are there any cities that really stand out to you that you've traveled to?
I'm trying to think. Chicago is really cool. It all depends on where you are. But I was near the lake and near the, I guess it's a river there, and there's a lot of cool spots there. And I actually, I purposely try to go to the goofball Americana kind of things.
Yeah, you like the tourist traps.
Yeah. So
me too, man.
I love tourist traps, but I also I tend to walk in neighborhoods I shouldn't be walking in. And of course, that's
a different kind of tourist trap.
Yeah. And of course, it's always late at night because, I'm working till 6 or 7 at night. So it's like, well, it's dark, but I want to check this place out. So whatever. So
I think most people that would see you in that position would be like, all right, this is odd for this guy to be walking around. He's got something wrong with him. We're going to leave this dude alone. Because they probably don't see that a lot.
I try not to put my hands in my pockets and look like a tourist. I try to kind of walk with purpose.
You gotta walk around like you belong there.
Yeah.
And no one will mess with you.
And I'm kind of eyes on a swivel a little bit. If I see somebody kind of, talking to themselves or shuffling or doing something weird, I'm like, I'll cross the street or something. Yeah. But I went to the underneath, I think it's the Chicago Tribune. There's a dive bar underneath, which they based the Cheeseburger SNL skit off of from the 70s.
Yeah.
It was a fun little dive bar. They made cheeseburgers right there in the middle, and then the sidebar, they had Schlitz on tap.
Schlitz.
And I had an old style and a Schlitz and a cheap cheeseburger, and it was great.
So right at home.
Yeah. Try to find those little hole in the wall places.
You don't find Schlitz too often.
I you can't find it outside of like the Midwest.
Yeah.
I think it's like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois.
Every now and then you go into a beer distributor that might have some, but even that's like very rare.
I love it. I mean, I was born in Milwaukee. I only stayed there for a few years. But my dad grew up in Milwaukee, and a lot of my mom's relatives were in Wisconsin. My dad grew up in Wisconsin, and a lot of my mom's relatives were in Wisconsin. And I just always remember him drinking Pabst and Schlitz.
That's where the love comes from. Nostalgia. All right.
And Leinenkugels.
So I'm curious, did you have any kind of affinity, attraction to photography as a kid? Like, what got you on that path?
I did, and it's always fun. Like, speaking of my parents, it's always funny because my mom was the type of person that would have a roll of film in her camera for the whole year. So it would be like, all right, there's maybe one picture at Halloween, and, you know, like Christmas is maybe 2 or 3 pictures. And like, so she was like always very conservative with film.
Interesting.
And whenever I got like, are they 120s? What was the little weird?
Yeah, 120.
120s.
Yeah.
Like whenever I got that, I would just like click them all off. And my mom's like, I'm not paying for you to. So she kind of held it back. And I was like, but I always liked photography, and I always liked television, and I always liked, movie making. Like we borrowed like a VHS camera when I was a kid, and I was like, you know, shooting. My sister was a cheerleader in the elementary school for the football team, so I was like, oh, I'll film this and I'll film this.
Did you try to make your own short films or anything like that?
We did, but it's really hard editing on VHS.
Oh yeah, you got to edit literally as you shoot.
So we edited in camera. I remember we did kind of like a horror film where it was like the POV of the camera was the monster's POV.
Nice.
So it was just like a cut here, and then I couldn't figure out. Like I couldn't figure out audio. I had a little mixer, and I was trying to get the mixer into the VCR. Like we'd play it back and try to put the track on top of it.
Yeah, most on-camera mics, especially in the era of VHS cameras, were just awful.
Right.
They were god-awful.
Especially when, like, you know...
You needed a boom operator.
Yeah.
An 8-year-old boom operator that knew what he was doing.
Especially when, like, you know, the people are running away from the camera, so they're far away from the camera.
Yeah, their
it's
backs are turned.
We're not getting that piece of dialogue there.
And then you get all the environmental noise. There's no way to cut that out.
Right.
Yeah, no control whatsoever. Are any of those films or pieces of them still kicking around anywhere?
I'm sure. I have stacks of VHS.
Good for you.
And I actually probably should transfer them.
I'm glad you have them. So many people I ask questions like that to, it's gone. They don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
I wish they still had it.
My best friend, who's also a Chris from elementary school and high school, he has, hopefully he has a bunch of them, because eventually, like, his parents got a VHS camera, so we would shoot a bunch of stuff. And I think he probably has like 5 or 6.
You should make that your homework to track that stuff down, man.
Yeah.
While you still can, because that stuff has obviously a finite shelf life.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, I got to make a note
while
to do
you
that.
can.
And now I have all the equipment to transfer it digitally.
And if you don't, you can come here and use mine.
All right, cool.
So I want to get into the heart of this conversation, because I think this is how you and I met is pretty fascinating. How this project came to be is pretty fascinating. And, you know, many people, the Beachead Comics sign, which you end up saving, they only know that sign as that. So before we go into the story of how you saved it, I want you to talk a little bit about, as you did research, you started to discover all these various signs underneath. So I want you to tell me a little bit about the history of the building before we get into kind of more the modern era of where things went.
Okay. So I always liked the sign, and I wanted to save it. So I found who owned the building, who was Rigo, and he's like, I mean, it's falling apart, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm probably going to paint over it anyway, so if you want it, you can take it. So I'm like, okay. So I spent a couple months, like, trying to get the graffiti off of it and staring at it and looking at it saying, how am I going to remove this off the wall? And I was kind of doing it in my spare time because I was still working, and, like, you know, whenever I had a free day, I'd go over to it. So I spent a lot of time just trying to get... Somebody had graffitied over it with spray paint, and then the old owner of the building put house paint over top of that
to cover the graffiti.
Yeah. So
layers of destruction.
Right. So I had to figure out how to get the house paint off, which was actually fairly easy with rubbing alcohol. And then I had to figure out how to get the graffiti off, which was harder. But
especially because the paint was flaking in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the places.
And the more I looked at it, like, I never really stared at it before. And the more I looked at it, I could tell it's bubbling up from whatever the sign was to begin with. So I'm standing out there on the corner, like, all the time, and, like, all the neighbors would kind of, like, walk by and go, "Hey, what are you doing?" Hey, what do you, and then like all the neighbors would talk to me, and one older guy was like, this used to be a pharmacy. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, it was called Mest Pharmacy. I'm like, oh, interesting. And then I would stand back from it, and I would look up in the upper right-hand corner, and if you like turn your head and you see it in different light, it's like, I think that says Mest. M-E-S-T. And then I could see it like bleeding through the sign. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. So I have a subscription to newspapers.com, and I'm just looking up Mest Pharmacy. Or no, I didn't know what the name of it was.
Until that guy told you.
Until that guy told me. And then I was like, oh, Mest. And then I looked up Mest, and I found out, oh, it was Mest Pharmacy. It was a father and son. And the farther I go back, it was another pharmacy, which was like a few doors down. And I don't know 100%, but it seems like that pharmacist moved for a year and bought the building on the corner.
On 16th and corner of 16th and Chew.
Yeah. And then he must have sold it to Mr. Mest, the original Mr. Mest. And then eventually his son took it over. And once this article came out in the newspaper about me saving the sign, somebody contacted me and said, I grew up in that neighborhood. I have a picture of my sister and I in the 60s in front of the sign. I'm like, oh my God, send it to me. And of course, it's mainly them and a little bit of the sign.
Yeah, it's not the full shot of
the sign. It's not the full shot of the sign, but you can say, oh, cool, it was the pharmacy. Since I have the newspaper.com, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to search 16th and Chew or 1601 Chew. The address now is 1601 West Chew Street, but back in the early 1900s, it was just Chew Street. It wasn't west or east. So then I changed all these different things. And I'm like, maybe it's just 16th and Chew or 1601 and Chew or 1601 West Chew. So I kept finding more and more things. What I found was it was the pharmacy 50s, 60s. Then it was a real estate agent for 10 years. And when you look up to the upper left, you can see part of that sign. And the good thing about Facebook is nothing goes away, or the internet, nothing goes away. So I found the original Beachead's Facebook page, and they have a picture of like halfway preparing the sign to paint the comic book sign.
Back in 1985.
Yeah. So you can see half of the real estate sign.
Wow.
So then if you look at the sign now, you can see that kind of behind it.
So it was a pharmacy, it was a realtor, it was an ice cream shop at one point?
There was ice cream at the pharmacy. So they had a counter, because they're always looking for a counter girl part-time. I don't know if it was like a soda jerk.
You found an ad.
I found an ad.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there was a want ad, just a tiny little strip, but it said, 1601 Chew Street, and he did a...
That's cool.
Counter girl, I think.
Wow.
So, and then before that, it was... I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I think it was Hollenbach originally bought the building, or maybe had the building built.
Yeah.
He was a grocer. So it started as a grocery store. And the funny thing is, from doing my research, it was definitely a grocery store maybe before the building was built. Because
so maybe like an outdoor stall.
It could have been, because there was a horse and cart accident older than the building.
Wow.
So I found that, and the only reason I found that is because it was like the corner of 16th and Chew, the horse got away, and so it was... Hollenbachs owned it for a while, and they lived upstairs. And it's funny, because I love early newspapers, because maybe it's really local news.
So what year is this roughly?
This is early 1900s.
So turn of the century.
Yeah. Every time they went on vacation, or every time somebody from out of town would like visit, it's like, this person is visiting the Hollenbachs at 16th and Chew. So it was really minuscule little things that I could find.
And now the news is all about how close a doomsday is.
Right. Which is amazing. So I get like these little bits of information. So he definitely owned it for a while. And it seems like he continued to own the building, but I think he handed over the grocery store to somebody else. There's like flour ads or something, and the specific brand of flour will list every grocery store that you can buy. So there's like every neighborhood had a grocery store. So it was like the 30 different neighborhoods.
So like the company would basically advertise where their suppliers are, their distributors are.
So it would be like the 30 different little grocery stores in Allentown, and one of them would be 16th and Chew, but it wasn't Hollenbach anymore. It was another name. And then I found another thing like that, like a meat distributor or something, but it was a third name. Yeah. So it was a grocery store for a while, from the early 1900s to the 50s, and then it turned into the pharmacy.
Yeah.
And the big thing was there's a big oval on the bottom that's broke out on the Beachead comic book sign, and it broke out all the way back to the metal, and it's rusty. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, that was one of the original things. And then in the bottom, it says ice, and you can see part of cream. I'm like, ooh, what was in the early 1900s that had an oval logo that said ice cream on the bottom? And then I'm looking and I'm trying, I'm researching all these old things. And then I saw on the side where it says eat. I'm like, ooh, ice cream. I can't see what the thing is, and eat. And I found a Breyers logo that would say eat on the left, always on the right, the little leaf in the middle, Breyers on the top, and ice cream on the bottom.
So the Breyers ice cream.
So it's definitely a Breyers ice. So I'm assuming that Breyers ice cream like paid for the sign.
Yeah.
And that probably took up like the bottom half of the sign. So it probably said Hollenbeck's grocery store, Breyers ice cream on the bottom.
So what do you, like, because this is a metal sign with a wooden frame. What year do you think this sign was originally installed, roughly?
So I'm thinking,
1920s?
I think 40s. Because once I took the whole sign down, there was a Freeman's Milk sign.
Yeah.
Painted on the brick.
You can see traces of all these signs over the years on this one metal sign, which you then remove, and there's yet another sign on the wall behind it.
And it was actually two signs, because one was in white and one was in black, but they're both Freeman's Milk signs, just different years. So I'm thinking Freeman's Milk sign was probably painted in the 20s or 30s, and then the Breyers sign was probably 30s, 40s.
So late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
So this sign is about 80, 90 years old.
Right.
And it has various different signs beneath it.
Yeah.
Truly historic.
And it's like a tin, it was probably like tin roofing kind of material.
Probably repurposed, yeah.
Yeah. And they tacked it up, originally the Breyers sign.
And it looked like that was probably still the original wood that was on it too, right?
Yeah.
With how much it was aged.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because that wasn't replaced 20, 30 years ago.
It was never replaced.
Never. Yeah, I don't think so.
And it's funny because, so there's a little overhang turret kind of window above it. The part where the window is didn't get much rain, so that's kind of better.
And protected the sign underneath.
Yeah, and then the side that wasn't protected, the wood was really rotted. Bunch of birds' nests were in there, and a bunch of leaves and just other things.
Well, better a bird's nest than a bunch of fucking hornets' nests, man.
Yeah, I know.
That could have been bad. So now that you've kind of like laid out all the happenings that went on there at 16th and Chew Streets and the amazing array of signs that exist underneath, tell me your personal connection with this sign.
So I grew up I said before, I was born in Wisconsin, but we moved here late 70s when I was like 4 or 5. Grew up in Palmer, in Easton. And then when we turned 16, my friend Chris and I were like, let's go. We got the Chevy minivan that he got from his parents. I'm like, let's go see the Lehigh Valley. So we'd always like drive all over the Lehigh Valley. And
early 90s?
Late 80s, early 90s. We used to go to Play It Again in Bethlehem because that was a cool record store, better than kind of the mall record stores. And we'd go, there was like 3 or 4 different, there's like Dreamscape Comics in Bethlehem. Yep. There was Mr. Monsters, which didn't last very long, in Easton. Which is kind of a weird place. I guess all comic book stores are weird.
By nature.
Yeah.
Good weird.
And what was the one on Cap's Comic Cavalcade?
Oh, yeah.
I've heard that name. Off of Airport Road, but it wasn't Airport Road. There was a few. So we would do that.
You would come mostly to go to the comic shops?
Yeah, we'd go to comic shops and record stores and just whatever. Like, we weren't bad kids, so we weren't doing anything too weird. We're like, comic books and records.
Yeah.
So we just
drive out. I love it.
Yeah. So we just drive around when we were 16 and 17 and 18. In the newspaper, there was one for Beachead Comics. I'm like, oh, let's go there. It's funny. It's just like a little neighborhood store. Like, there's nothing really.
No parking lot, nothing like that.
Yep. No parking lot, no other really stores there. Like, a block away is the Allentown Fairground. Oh, yeah. A block one way is West Park, and a block the other way is like the fairgrounds and stuff. But this comic book store is really in the neighborhood.
Which I love. I love when things are in neighborhoods like that. Now we want to consolidate everything, and I get that you do that in the suburbs, which, again, that's not the way society should be designed. But in a city, you need places like that in the middle of a neighborhood, not just a corner store.
Right. A
little oddball thing like a record store, a bookstore, or a comic book shop.
Yeah. Now you're going to make me go off on tangents. But,
please do.
But
You've heard this podcast before. I'm all about the tangents, my friend.
well, Beachead eventually, after 30 years, the manager passed away, so they had a little ceremony for him, and they also had kind of a 30-year anniversary for the store itself, and it closed. A bunch of people tried to like restart it at that location. I think the owner didn't want to rent it out again or jack the price way up. So somebody else bought the Beachead name and the rest of the comics and moved it a few blocks away, still on Shoe Street. I talked to him because I didn't know who owned the building or who owned the sign. And he's like, that's interesting because I own the name Beachead and I own all the old things. And I'm like, well, I'm saving the sign. And he's like, oh, you know what? I have something that I think would be interesting to you. And he handed me this picture, which I'll describe, which is an old Morning Call article of like an 8-year-old kid with a Spider-Man comic book in front of the sign, which is back in the mid-'80s. Oh, this might have been 86, I think. So it's this kid that...
Only a year after the sign was painted.
Right. And so the sign looks great in the picture. His name's Ray Lobach. I actually found the guy who's an adult now and met him and interviewed him about the comic book store. And he's like, yeah, I grew up in this neighborhood and my grandfather would like take me over and we'd play. And he's like... He thought that just everyone had a comic book store in their neighborhood because that's what he knew.
Oh, what a paradise that would be.
Yeah. But, I mean, he told some great stories about it, and it's funny. I mean, I loved it because the manager was kind of this little guy. His name was Jeff. Always wore a leather vest, and he had, like, you know, a bunch of pins on it, and he had a little Star Trek communicator pin. And... he had a box that he stood on, so when he was behind the counter, he always looked like taller than us.
Okay.
But we knew he was like fairly short. But I like he had the perfect look for a comic book store, and I loved it because it was an old store, never kind of was updated, and just jam packed with a ton of comics and stuff.
The original Beachead.
The original Beachead, and it's funny, like, you know, talking to the kid that grew up there, Ray. He said when he was a kid, Jeff didn't have any time for him. He's like, all right, find what you want and get out. But then when he grew up and got older and still went back to the comic book store, Jeff was a little more interested in talking to him because he was really, I think Jeff was an interesting character. He really wanted it to be more an adult thing. And you know, he had a lot of like kind of...
He wanted people to take it serious.
Yeah. And he had a lot of stuff that was like geared more towards adults and the art and the story and everything.
I think he was ahead of his time because now that's what a lot of comic book stores are. But back then it was considered like childish.
Right. So he didn't really he was never yelling at the kids, but he never really had time for the kids. He was always more... So even as like me and my friend as... you know, older teenagers, he's like, all right, whatever. But I think he had like long conversations with like the adults that would come in and, you know, storylines and art and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm curious, the owner the guy that has a store now, why wasn't he interested in the sign?
It's funny because when I talked to him, I'm like, do you know who owns that sign? And he was kind of like, well, I own the name and all the comics, so I think I own it. I'm like, I don't think you do.
That's not how property works.
Yeah. It's like whoever owns that building owns it. And this was before I found out Rigo owned it now. So I'm like, I think I'm getting it. So went back to Rigo. Rigo gave it to me, and then I had to figure out how to move it.
Well, Rigo was going to throw it away.
Yeah,
right?
he was just... because it was you know, 80-year-old sign, and it was like and Rigo's an artist, and he's a muralist, and he's like, I'm going to paint something new. But the sign is so wrecked, you can't even buff it down to the metal again. It's so... messed up. So he was just going to either put up a new sign or, as we know now, he painted right on the brick, which is a beautiful new... I wish he would have done it the other side next to the Freeman's Milk.
Instead of over the ghost sign, the 100-year-old ghost sign. Right. I love you, Rigo, but that was not a good move.
Yeah. It's beautiful, and it's cool to have in the neighborhood. But I wish he would have done it to the right of the window instead of the left of the window.
My personal opinion with things like that is, you know, if you're not really respecting things like that, and especially an artist like Rigo, you're not really giving consideration because why should people respect your things then, moving forward? That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
You didn't respect that sign, that art, why should somebody respect your art? I don't know. I think you should extend a little bit more respect towards it. But, I mean, hey, he owns a property, so I guess in the end it was his call.
Right. The new owner of Beachead was kind of at the beginning, I think he was going to fight me about who owns it, but I'm like, but I mean, after a while, after I met with him a couple of times, I was like, I saved it and I moved it, and he's like, all right, that's cool. That's
yeah,
cool
but
that
if
you
he
moved
actually
it.
cared, he would have did something with the sign to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was just in the middle of trying to get his business started and stuff, and he just kind of forgot about the sign.
Overlooked it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have overlooked that.
And it's 10 feet by 12 feet.
Yeah, it's huge.
I don't even think he has room on the side of his building now. And
no, because he has windows on that side. Yeah.
And there wouldn't be any room inside. So.
No. Well, in fact, in the original...
And it was a pain to move.
Oh, it was, yeah, which we'll get into that. So, but you have some other history, too, because I remember you telling me that you actually had an apartment across the street from it, too.
So, as I was saying before, I worked at the Express Times at night as a lab tech and, still living in my parents' house in Palmer. And then I got a job at MedStar Television, which... they did the show Metal Gear Detectives, which turned into Forensic Files. So I worked on Forensic Files as a freelancer for a while, and then as a full-time person. They're out in West Coastville, so I'm like, ooh, I should get an apartment in Allentown. And I was just looking at apartments, not even thinking about Beachead or like that neighborhood. And there was like a cool apartment with a turret window, and that was my bedroom. So I got that apartment. And then, once I moved in, I looked diagonally out of my bedroom window. I'm like, Beachead Comics is right there. So, like, from my bedroom window, I would see the Beachead Comics sign.
If this were a movie about your life, there would be some hardcore foreshadowing there.
It's funny because my friend who I used to go to Beachead with is like, why do you care that much about it? Because he had moved here and there and stuff, and he was out of the area. I'm like, I don't know if you were around, but I used to live right there. And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I don't know if he ever went to that apartment. He went to my other Allentown apartment. But at that point in my life, I wasn't really buying comic books. But I'm like, I live right next to the comic book store. I started buying comics again, and like going in there and hanging out.
How could you not? It's right there.
Yeah. And I always look at it, and I was like, wow. And it's funny because I would see the sign from afar, but I never like stood next to it and stared at it. I'd always just kind of pass it and go, oh, that's cool. Let me go buy some comics.
I think a lot of people did the same thing, and that's why it went underappreciated for so long.
Yeah. There's always like kids in the neighborhood later as I was like cleaning it, and like their dads would bring them by, and they were like, my son loves that Spider-Man. All comics kind of go in cycles.
Sure.
And, Spider-Man's big again. And,
yep. Yeah, he has been since the 2002 Raimi Spider-Man.
Yeah,
it's been one of the main ones again.
But it's funny. It's like it kind of goes away, and it's like, oh, Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this comic book store has been kind of a staple in your life, your teenage years on.
Yeah, and then so like early 20s, I had a job, and I lived there, and then I moved out of that apartment a couple blocks away on 17th Street, and kind of forgot about the comic book store again. Got married, had a kid.
Life does its thing,
right? I'm like, I can't buy comics anymore.
Did you sell your comics? Or did you hold on to them?
It's funny, I gave away the ones that I bought in the late 90s and early 2000s. I gave those away, but I have all the ones when I was a kid.
Smart. You were connected with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd always go like back to the neighborhood and go, oh, the comic book store is still here. And I don't know why. Like I used to drive a Scion XB, which is the real boxy car. And I think because the front windshield is flat, like a stone off the road, it won't just fly over the car. It'll hit it and crack it.
Oh,
so
shit.
Every like 2 years, I was just getting
a
new windshield. And I'd always go to Jack's Glass in Allentown. And, you drop it off. It takes like an hour to put it in and an hour and a half, or like, another half an hour for it to cure and stuff. So I'm like, well, I'm in the old neighborhood. I'm going to walk around. So I'd always like every 2 years, I
drop back into your old stomping grounds.
Go to the comic book store, go to like, Wertz's and have a hamburger. And
good old Wertz's. I love that place.
Yeah. Or maybe Ringer's Roost or something.
Yeah.
So like, and I always do that. And like, every once in a while, like, my oldest daughter, we'd always take her to West Park and see stuff. So like if we were ever in the neighborhood, I'd go, oh, here's West Park where we used to push you around. Oh, and here's the comic book store. So like right before I got the sign, I went back and I was like, oh man, it's the comic book store is closed. Oh, that sucks. And then, I found on their Facebook page that Jeff had passed away. I'm like, oh, that sucks. And then I didn't think about it for like a couple years. And then I'd go back to the neighborhood, and there used to be a butler painted on the front window, which is a glass window. And that last time I went back, the butler was scraped off. I'm like, oh crap. if the butler's gone, what are they doing with the sign on the side? And that's when it like spurred me, like late 2021. Like, I want to do something. I want this sign.
Yeah.
And as I said before, it's like 10 foot by 12 foot. I'm like, even if I can't get the whole sign, the panel just with Batman on it that says comics and magazines in a little bubble, I'm like, that would be a cool piece just to hang in my like living room.
Sure.
If my wife would let me do it.
Yeah.
Or in my basement.
She's a cool lady. I think she would have. She would have let you.
But like, I was like, at least I could get that. And then I had to figure out like, no, I gotta take the whole thing.
And I remember, and that's how you and I first crossed paths. Right. You were on one of the Facebook groups that we're both a part of, and you put a photo of it, and you're like, hey, this might be crazy. Paraphrasing here, of course, but it's along the lines of what you said. But I want to save this sign. I don't know how or where I could possibly take it.
Right.
And I was like, this is fucking right up our alley.
Yeah.
And so I messaged you, and I don't know if you took me serious, but I was like, hey, I got this gallery, and I think it will be perfectly suited to display this, because it's like comic book art. Like I even said in the Morning Call article that we're both featured in, that I consider this to be a piece of Allentown folk art.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Which it is.
Definitely, yes.
And had it not been for you, it would have been in the trash.
Yes.
So you and I have that conversation. What was your initial reaction when we started the conversation?
So I had gone through a couple different things. There was they've been forever trying to start like this art place in one of the old. I live in Emmaus, so there's a bunch of Rodale buildings.
Yeah,
so there's
the long gestating art building.
Yeah. So they've been trying to do that forever. So I was like, this was kind of the end of COVID, and I was on like a weekly Zoom meeting just so we wouldn't all go crazy because we're all stuck in our houses.
Got to do something.
So we were all talking about it, and I was like, it would be really great if I could move this thing in. And they're like, well, we don't really have the room or whatever. So then I like reached out to somebody else, and they're like, well, we don't really have the room. I'm like, well, if worst comes to worst, I can disassemble it and put it in my shed, and then just let
hope for the best.
Hope for the best. And like, I don't know if I can fit it in my shed because my lawnmower and stuff.
Yeah.
But when you said yes, I'm like, oh, this seems perfect. It stays in Allentown. Like, I'm not bringing it out of Allentown to Emmaus.
Yep. Yeah, it stays in Allentown.
It stays in Allentown.
It's so perfect.
I knew you'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and then you came and you saw the space, and you were immediately like, yes, in the basement. And the location we have for it is perfect.
Right.
It, like, kind of feels like it's outside in some ways with all the art and graffiti street art out there too.
Yeah.
We even have street signs down there.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to complete the whole essence of it. I was like, it's kind of like, was it Night at the Roxbury, where they have the idea where they make the outside of the club look like they're inside, and the inside of the club look like it's outside. It's kind of what the basement of our building has turned into here.
Yeah. It's a cool space. It's a cool building.
Thanks, man. And like you and I remember when we started having the conversation of what to do, and I'm glad we were both on the same page, because you had the option of either restoring it, which would be trying to kind of repaint it and bringing it up to its original look,
right,
or preserve it, kind of keep it as is.
Right.
And there was, both you and I, there was no second thought to it. It's like, no, we're going to preserve it. We want to keep it as is, because the weathered look, the beat up, like that was the essence of what it had become.
Right.
Why change that? Why fuck with that?
I originally, like, when I first looked at it, I'm like, yeah, I can get it repainted. And then I started, like, that's when I started doing the history of sign painters and what kind of paint they used and all this stuff. And that was actually helped me too when I was taking the other paint off of it. I'm like, oh, this is enamel, but this is house paint and this is latex, so I can scrub it a lot and it won't hurt it. But
before that, you knew nothing about these paints. You all learned this throughout this process.
Right, yeah. And as I'm doing it, then the guy said, oh, that used to be a pharmacy. And then I see like the 4 or 5 different signs underneath. I'm like, oh, if I painted this over, it would lose all the Allentown history of what this sign is. So, like, I don't want it to go back to normal. Like, maybe, so I, cleaned it up as best I could, tried to, like, not have it chip off anymore. And I spent a long time clear coating it, so hopefully on site,
yes.
So hopefully it'll stay. And then actually
during the transport, yeah.
So I did that on site, and then when I got it here, it was still in a bunch of pieces, and I clear coated it again.
Yeah, additional rounds.
So hopefully it'll stay for a while, and since it's indoors, hopefully it'll stay.
Yeah, and you brought it over piece by piece.
Piece by piece.
Except for the end.
Right. Well, yeah, so I figured, I was like, how am I going to lift this off? This is not going to work. And then I'm like, oh, they had like little little tack nails. So I'm like, I think I can pull these out. And I was like pulling, and the bottom of the sign anyway was rotted.
It was
So I could just, even without any tools, I could pull the bottom right panel away. So I'm like, all right, I think I can just take this one off.
Start from the bottom.
And then the next one was kind of easier. And then I was trying to take a little razor blade on each of the nail heads just so I wouldn't damage the sign anymore, just trying to get the nail head out and pull it out. And then, of course, there was like a couple 3-inch nails that went all the way through into the brick.
Oh, man.
And I was like, all right, these are a little harder, but the little nails were good. So I took it panel by panel, and I had enough space in my car, so I could take like one at a time. And then I got to the top, which was 12 feet wide. So I got everything off of the frame except for the top 2 panels that are 12 feet wide. And I'm looking at it, and I'm staring at it, and one of the guys in the neighborhood is like, that seems real loose. I think we can pull that down. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And he's like, you get on one side, I get on the other. And the guy, we just shook it until it fell off the wall. So I have a good video of it just, sorry.
That's awesome.
So I just have a video of it like falling on the ground. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then Rigo was there. He's like, I've got a saw. We can cut the top off. I'm like, oh, great. Cut the top off. And then I'm like, wait, it's detached from the wall, and I don't have a way to get this 12-foot thing.
And now it's already off the wall, so it has to be moved as soon as possible.
Right, because I don't want anybody to take it or
mess with it,
or stomp on it or whatever. So I'm like, so the sun is setting, and I'm like trying to figure out. And this was in a weird time where I had to get a new car that didn't have a hitch on it, and I was waiting to get a hitch on it, and I'm like, oh wait, I don't have a hitch on my car, so I can't put like my normal little trailer. And my trailer is not 12 feet long. I'm like, even if I got the trailer on, how would I do it? So I'm like texting people. I'm like, anybody have a pickup truck or anybody have anything? And my brother-in-law texted me. He's like, you have a 12-foot boat. I'm like, oh yeah. So I had to drive back. Luckily, my wife was home. I had to switch cars, put my 12-foot little flatboat onto her car, drive it over, put the whole thing on the boat, and just drive through Allentown with a sign on top of a boat.
You must have gotten some serious looks on the way here.
And it was like I strapped it down, but it's still like flimsy metal.
Oh, on top of a giant metal sail.
On top of an aluminum boat, so it's just like hitting, and making noise. And I'm like trying to go as slow as possible. That was
probably the most nerve-wracking fucking drive ever.
And it was like the topmost part, so I didn't spend as much time clear coating it as I would have liked to, because I didn't think I was really moving it that day.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't want to hit too many bumps because I don't want all the stuff to flake off. And especially like the upper right really got a lot of sun and rain, and like there's actually a tree there too.
Yeah, and the tree was
like slapping up against it.
Yeah.
So I was driving slow, and then I arrived, and then then spent some time here.
Well, I'll never forget that you hit me up. You're like, I'm on the way. And basically, wait till you see this. And we've had all kinds of art. We've had all kinds of events. A number of weird things have happened here. I can safely say that this is the one and only time we've had a piece of art delivered on a boat. And I got footage of it. I filmed you backing it in. I was like, this is amazing. Amazing. And fortunately, we had the space in the basement to kind of lay this all out without stacking on top of each other.
Right. For
you to come in whenever you had the free time in between other gigs and stuff like that and just work on it. And I remember how difficult it was for you, me, and Rob to finally stand it up and move it in place, because it was... We built a new frame on it, but it was still quite flimsy.
Right. So the top 2 panels has the original frame, and then I had a little bit of the wood left, and then I figured out that the way lumber was different back then.
Yep.
So the new lumber I was buying was like a half an inch smaller.
Yep.
I was like, oh, I thought it was just going to be easy. So then I kind of piecemealed a bunch of stuff together. It was together on the ground, but once we started to lift it up, the sides were like buckling in. I'm like, oh, how are we going to, and it's a heavy wooden with a bunch of metal on it. I'm like, how are we going to lift this up without tacoing it and crushing the whole thing?
So we had to very carefully stand it up and then inch it into place.
Right. We finally put like a couple more 2x4s on the side just to like make it strong.
Yeah.
And three
and we had 3 people total. And we're like, we were too far in. There was no going back at that point. You're like, we needed at least twice as many people as we had. But here we are. But you know what? That's kind of the story of the gallery here, man. We never have enough to get things done, but we somehow still get it done.
Well, that was the whole story of the sign, because like people like, I'm just a dude on a sidewalk. Like I don't have any funding. I don't have any. I'm like, it's just me, and everybody would walk by and like, you know what? You should take this whole thing and you should move it all in one piece. I'm like, me? Like, I don't have a crane.
Yeah.
I don't, like, how am I going to...
That's people who haven't tried to do things like that. So.
Right. I'm like, yeah, that would, in an ideal world, if I was like a sign creator and I had the truck and I had a flatbed and I had
what you
this.
should have done? You should have hired a bunch of Amish people to just walk it down to the gallery for you. But even then, how would we gotten it inside? There's no door.
Oh, right.
You know what? We have the big loading dock door. But it wouldn't have fit through the other door coming in then.
Yeah, and around corners and
stuff.
Yeah.
No, you did it the only way it could have been done, at least to bring it into this building.
Yeah.
But now it's here. It's sealed with minimal paint flake.
Right.
It looks great. You have all the photos taped up around it of, some of the photos you described throughout this conversation of what it used to look like, and the brother and sister next to it back in, what was it, 1986? Oh, no, that was that, kid. Yeah.
This kid was like 86, who was reading the comic in front of the comic.
So they were even earlier.
They're from the 60s when it was, because they knew Mr. Mest, when it was a pharmacy. From his story, Mr. Mest wanted a picture of the new sign. So it was definitely painted twice as the pharmacy.
As when it was Mest, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe 3 times, but it was definitely twice as a pharmacy.
And then you utilized your photography and videography skills to document this entire process, did you not?
I did, yes.
How much footage did you end up with? I'm curious, roughly, if you know.
Did a lot of time lapses and stuff. I mean, there's definitely a few hours of stuff that I think most of it's kind of boring, but...
but you got the interviews and everything, too.
Right, yeah. So there's definitely like 2 or 3 hours of just me cleaning it and moving it and stuff. But then there's interviews. There's interviews with Ray, who was the little kid that grew up there. I interviewed another guy who worked at the old Beachead at the end. There's a couple other interviews that I want to do that it's amazing, because I'm looking at this like Morning Call article, and it's like, Christopher Elston, who is 48. I'm like, oh my God, I'm 51 now. That was a long time ago. But you've
been working on this so long, you're in a new decade.
Right.
You also
it's an ongoing documentary that I'm
and so you are going to still piece it all together at some point and show the world your efforts.
Yes, because I think it's going to be like a tangent documentary, because I want to say, because when I'm standing on the side of the sidewalk, I'm like, this is cool. I can't really read who painted this, and then somebody drives past and goes, my English teacher painted that, and they just drive away, and I'm like running after the car going, wait.
Did he stop?
No, they didn't stop.
Great random fucking info there, dude.
I'm like, what do you mean your English teacher? Like, so eventually Tom Wilde, who painted it, his son-in-law stopped by. He came up to me, he's like, are you painting over that? I'm like, no, actually I'm clear coating it. He's like, oh, because my father-in-law painted that. And like, finally, yes,
wow.
Tell me.
Happenstance, man.
So the crazy thing is, he works for like a nonprofit that builds bikes for like the kids in the neighborhood.
Oh, like Bike Works.
Yeah, which is right behind the new Beachead.
Wow, that's so
And
random.
I'm like, what? Wait, you work there? But so he told me, and he got me in touch with Tom. So I actually got to meet Tom. I found a bunch of articles about him. He was an English teacher at William Allen High School, which is right in the same neighborhood. And I think he started out early in his career painting signs for Hess Brothers, the department store, the big department store that was in Allentown. Man. I don't know what the economics were, but he's like, I think I can make more money being a public school teacher than a sign painter. I'm like,
And these were all hand-painted.
Yeah, definitely hand-painted.
And he was self-taught.
I think so. Yeah. So he was an English teacher, and then he would do like signs on the weekends or like in the summertime and stuff. And he told me like he did a bunch of signs around Allentown, but I think this comic book store sign might be the only like one that's around.
That's incredible.
Because everything was scraped off or thrown in the trash or whatever.
Yeah, and what you actually did, it was cool. You because his signature was gone, you had him do a new one,
right?
Which is on a piece of like magnetic paper.
Yeah, it's on another piece of metal,
Yeah.
so I can put magnets on it and put it up
it's
next
awesome.
to his original signature. Yeah,
It's super cool that you did that. And it's great that you were able to link up with him and interview him while you have the chance to do so.
So the cool thing was I interviewed him with a bad microphone, so that's another project that I have to do.
You have to circle back?
I interviewed him on the street when the sign was still completely up.
Lots of environmental noise.
Yeah, and he like, pointed it out and said, "Look at this brushstroke, look at this brushstroke." And then I went back to his house like a month later, and I had him paint a little bit and paint his signature and stuff.
And you filmed that?
I filmed that just
Cool.
to show like his technique of like, you push the brush and that makes it wider, and then you can pull it up a little bit and makes it smaller. I'm like,
Was it the first time he had painted in a long time?
I think so, because he's been focusing on writing like short stories.
I was going to say English teacher. He probably leaned more towards writing in the end.
Yeah, and also, but he was also what's the, I forget what the technique's called, but like kind of the Asian technique of woodworking where everything's like a joint.
Oh, there's no nails or anything like that. Yeah, I forget the name of it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
So he showed me another project that he was doing there. He was making a little table with that kind of
interesting. He's an interesting guy.
He is an interesting guy.
Wow,
which is funny because he is the uncle of like one of my neighbors in Emmaus too.
It's random how this is all so closely connected. Like
I just met his sister. So Joe Biden came through.
Yeah.
Which was funny.
I saw you were doing your live stream.
I did a 6.5 hour live stream with Joe Biden.
And you got it, right?
Oh, yeah.
He drove by?
Well, it's funny because I live on a corner and they blocked off, and I'm like, I think he's going right by my house. So I just had a camera off my front porch, and he went to the side of my house, and then they turned right in front of my house. So I got. I
remember seeing the photo of like all the gear in your living room set up, and I was like, I hope he gets it. I don't remember seeing if he did, but yeah, I'm glad he drove by. That it was worthwhile.
Right. So the funny thing was, all the schools were half days, and all my neighbors are teachers, and my wife's a teacher, so they were home. My daughter's home, and like, it seemed like a lot of people took off work too, because everybody was just on the streets. And
now, was your family, were like they getting a kick out of what you were doing here, or were they like, "This, you got to knock this shit off"?
Wait, which thing? The streaming or the
streaming? The streaming.
I think my wife was all right with it. I was actually going to set up multiple cameras and like switch between them, but our neighbors that were like closer to Main Street were having a little party, little Biden parties. So I'm like, I'm just going to let it go.
They ruined your shot.
Yeah. my daughter really liked it. My wife was, I don't know.
So,
she's indifferent. Well, so the only reason I'm telling you that is we went down to the neighbors, had a few beers, watched Biden go by and watched Biden leave. And like this woman I'm talking to, she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm Jenny's mom." I'm like, "Wait a minute, are you Tom Wilde's sister?" She's like, "Yes, I am." I'm like, "I have his sign."
Wow.
So I'm like, it was the weirdest thing.
It's
like,
incredible.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure she was familiar with the sign.
Kind of. Not as much. I mean, she's like, "Oh yeah, he's a sign painter. Does this." I'm like, I have his sign. She's like, "Oh, okay." So I don't think she was that excited.
What did your family think when you took on this sign adventure?
I don't know. I always have like little things going on, so my kids are kind of used to it, and it's funny because my daughters were like driving around at that point, so I definitely got a picture of them texted to me at like 11 o'clock at night where they were in front of the sign. I'm like, what?
I love it.
Yeah. So they drove from Emmaus to Allentown just to
cool.
get like a picture of the sign and stuff, and they thought I was a little crazy, but I think that they think it's cool. They're definitely both really artistic, and
they've definitely at least warmed up to the idea now, especially now they've seen the final product because they were here for the open house.
Yeah.
Right.
My younger daughter. Yeah.
So that's right. Yeah, and your wife as well.
Yeah.
So what we actually did is we had an open house here at the building, and we kind of tied it in with the unveiling of the newly preserved Beachead Comics mural sign in the basement. Remember that?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
It was great. There's a couple of people. There's actually a guy that I didn't know before that I know now who frequents the new Beachead. He has an Instagram all about comics. And he's a local guy. I actually saw him when Biden came through. I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" So like now I see him like all the time. Like
was he walking by reading a comic book?
No, but he was walking by, and so I met him at the open house, and now I know him, and he actually always goes to the the arcade that's in the South Mall.
Back to the arcade.
Which both my daughters work at certain times. Like,
awesome.
My older daughter's in college, so she'll work there in the summer.
Cool.
And my younger daughter works there on and off. Yeah, so I met him. I met a woman that I hadn't seen in, I would say, 20 years, who was the main actress in an independent film that was shot in the Lehigh Valley.
Wow.
That I'm friends with on Facebook, but I haven't seen her in 20 years. And she showed up to the...
That's awesome.
And I was like, oh, what's up? She's like, oh. So, yeah, it was a cool experience.
What was people's reaction? Like, what did they think of the sign?
I think they thought it was really cool that I saved it. And they really enjoy the building, too. Like, my daughter loves this place.
Yeah.
Like, after this, I got to ask you a question about something.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But, yeah.
And it's weird because that sign was outside for all these years, and so many people just pass by, they don't pay attention, they're just on to the next thing,
right.
Which I think is partially attributed to driving. When you're
Right.
walking,
Yeah.
you're taking these things and you're looking around, you're taking your environment in, right? When you're driving, you're just blowing past everything.
Right.
So people who came out to that open house probably had driven by this thing many times,
Right.
but paid no mind to it.
Right.
Now here it is, maybe because the context has changed, where it's not an advertising piece in the side of a business. Now it's a preserved piece of what I refer to as folk art inside an art gallery. They now have this different appreciation for it.
Right.
Isn't that strange? How all you did was take the same sign and put it in a different location, and now like it's an event to come out and see it.
Yeah.
Like what is the deal with that? What do you like? Why do you think people are just not mindful to these things?
I think it's, especially signs are, I don't think people see it as art or like what was put into it, especially now since everything's kind of vinyl and stuff. But like,
yeah,
I think people, if they take the time to appreciate like the hand painted signs, because this is a 10 by 12 foot sign that he had to get. There's a yellow border around the whole thing that he had to get straight in the little corners and stuff. And like,
by the way, how long did it take him to paint it?
He
roughly
said it was less than a week.
Okay,
like
that's pretty fast for that sign that size.
Yeah. And it's funny, I forget what he said. He got paid like less than $300 to do it.
That's insane.
And and with like all the paint that he had to use and stuff.
Wow. So he had to buy his own materials out of that money.
Right.
That's some bullshit. But so now this put you on a path now. Like you're not just stopping at the sign, because since then you've already brought more signs here. So now I guess first of all, did you have an interest in signs before this, or did this spark the interest in signs?
It's funny because I always like signs, and I always like the goofball signs. Like I remember like,
it's like just your tourist traps.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I remember even like, so when I was a kid, 16, growing up, there was always these signs in our neighborhood that would say, "Dog waste is a threat to our children." And I'm like, oh my God, that sign's awesome. So I may have one of those.
Oh my God.
From when I was 16.
That's so over the top.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa, I need to own this.
Wow.
So I've always liked signs, and I always like, especially now that I have a cell phone with a camera on it, I always take pictures of like the goofball signs or the weird signs.
Yeah.
So I always liked them, but I never really like. I don't have that many signs. Actually, I've been collecting a lot more since this sign.
Sure.
But,
you got the stuff from Brass Rail.
Yeah. So now I've met some new people, and there's a couple kids that live in South Allentown that are big sign collectors.
Really?
Yeah. And
I didn't know that was a thing here.
Yeah, they're brothers. They're probably both in their early to mid 20s.
What kind of signs do they have?
The one kid really likes oil cans and that kind of stuff, but he has all the little flea market antique shops. He has booths in like 2 or 3 of them, and it's just it's a wide range of things. He stopped by the other day, and he's like, "Are you gonna be home?" And I said, "Yeah." And he came up, and he didn't really remember where my house is, but now I have a giant dinosaur in front of my house. So he's like, "Well,
hard to miss."
Yeah, this must be your house." So he has a couple signs from the Americas Pharmacy, which started diagonally from the Americas Hotel, and now they moved farther west. But
it's still the Americas Pharmacy, still a thing. Wow,
yeah,
I haven't heard of it.
I'm trying to think where it is. It's like 17th. No, it must be like 19th.
Wow.
But it's still around in that kind of neighborhood.
How did I miss that?
So he gave me one of the signs. He's like, "I found 2 signs. I know you love Allentown." So I have that sign. I had a couple friends that have a friend that bought the old Max Hobby Store in Bethlehem, and they're like, there's 2 big signs up there, and he's redoing the whole place. You should get those signs. I'm like, okay. So we went, and the front of the building, there's a whole giant like 30-foot sign, and on the side of the building, I think it's like 12 feet, 15 feet. So I'm like, it's not that interesting of a sign, because it was kind of, maybe it was red at some point, but it kind of looks orange now. And it kind of looks like, not a stencil, but kind of maybe a stencil kind of thing. And I'm like, it's not that interesting, but it's historic, so I think we should save it. And then there was an oval that was hand painted. I'm like, that's the cool thing, that it says, Max Hobby Shop in an oval on yellow plastic that was originally like lit from the inside.
Nice.
I'm like, let's go get that. So there was a fire escape there. I went up just to look at it, and I peeled it off to see what was underneath. I'm like, there's a second sign under here.
What?
And that's hand painted that says Max Hobby Shop. And I'm like, but what's it on? And I peeled that off, and the original sign was a neon sign that was Lehigh Valley Motor Club on it.
So there was a third sign.
There was this third original box sign. So I'm like, oh my God, we got to get this. So I helped the owner of the building take it down, and it's the same thing as how I got the Beachead sign. It was just like 2 of us like on a roof going, how are we gonna get this down? I'm like, I don't know, we'll wrap a rope around it, and we'll get the saws.
Hope we're strong enough.
Yeah, we'll get the sawzall out. It was a neon box, and we put the rope inside the top of the box, and he starts like lowering it down, and I'm like underneath it. I'm like, I shouldn't be underneath this. But it's kind of dropping, and then the rope starts cutting into the metal.
Oh,
so
no.
the rope's getting closer and closer.
Oh, no.
So it kind of, towards the end, it just kind of fell, and we got it, and I got the 2 pieces and kind of disassembled it. So I have like the two sides that are the yellow Max Hobby Shop.
Where's that one? Because that one's not here.
No, I have that. That's in my shed.
It's at your shed.
Yeah.
Ah.
So I have that. I have the original thing that says Lehigh Valley Motor Club, that, all the neons broke. They actually left a lot of the neon up there, but of course the transformer's gone.
Yeah.
And I have some of the neon, but I don't know what to do. Most of it's completely broken, but I have a bucket full of broken neon that I know what to do. And so that was 3 signs there. And then, I freelance and I go on trips. And he's like, you got to get that other big sign. I'm like, that other one is 30 feet long, and it used to be a neon sign, so there's no way I can get it down myself. So he kept calling, he kept texting. He's like, you better take the sign. I'm like, well, right now I'm in Dallas, so I can't do it. And then I'm like, I'll come by when I can. And I came by one day in my flip-flops just to look at it and try to just stand there and go, we can't do the same thing that we did with the side sign, because it's
way too big.
It's way too big. It's way too heavy, and I don't want it to swing and smash a window. Or he had 2 guys that were like demo guys that were on the inside doing stuff, and they're like, we got to get this off. Let's do it. I'm like, well, he's like, no, get up on the roof. Let's do it. And I'm like, I'm in flip-flops. I didn't plan on doing that. So I'm up here with these two guys.
I would have just went barefoot at that point.
Yeah, just saws on and hacks on and doing all this stuff.
More rope.
More rope. And we pretty much, most of it, we just decided to get it off the box. So we got most of
the arms are still mounted to the wall then, huh?
Yeah. To the ceiling of the roof.
Yeah.
We've peeled off the first 2 layers. Then we just cut the face off of the original thing. So that's 30 feet. And then so the 2 kids that I knew in South Allentown have a trailer. And I'm like, can you guys come over and do this? And so they helped me get all these signs.
There's
on
no
their
way
trailer.
This one's in your shed too.
So it's really 6 different signs.
Oh, shit.
Because it's 3 layers on 2 sides and the circle signs. So I have the 2 circle signs in my shed. Outside my shed, I have the smaller Lehigh Valley Motor Club sign, and I have a couple other signs of that.
So your yard is turning into a sign graveyard.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to hide it. So I had them out. Through Facebook, I found the son of one of the owners of the hobby shop, because the hobby shop was started in the 50s. Then they moved to that location in the 70s. And I think his father owned it in the 80s. So I found the son. The son has one part of the sign. And I found another guy who loved that hobby shop, and he has one of the 30-foot
Oh my God.
that he has a big warehouse
this is
that he can put it in.
some kind of life size puzzle.
Right. And so the two kids that helped me move, the bottom sign was just the neon Lehigh Valley Motor Club sign, which was the AAA before the AAA. And he's like, what are you thinking about doing with that? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, it would be really cool if we could re-neon that. I'm like, if you're going to do that, take it. So I gave, like, they helped me. Like, I didn't pay them to move it. And I'm like, your payment is the sign.
Yeah.
And he hasn't done anything with it yet, but it would be, like, we're almost thinking about America on Wheels. That would be a cool sign that says Lehigh Valley.
I was thinking the same thing. That'd be a great spot for it. Now, you've actually talked to me in the past about now wanting to open up at some point a sign museum.
Yes.
Right?
I would love to. So those same kids got the neon from the brass rail, and they don't know what to do with the neon. I'm like, I will acquire it.
And then you now you have interest in learning to re-neon them.
Yeah. Now we're going back to a tangent of back to the arcade in the South Mall. They had a neon sign that half of it blew out, and it's just like, a small little sign that you'd hang in the window. I'm like, I think I know how to fix that, because it's not, like, the glass isn't broken. It might just be like, the power supply. So I got it. I took it, figured it out, got it going again, and I gave it back to them. So I'm starting out small. I know those little power supplies, I know what to do with. So I'm going to try to, if I ever have time again, to get at least one of the brass rail neon signs going again. There's a little one that says bar, which I love.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
I'd like to get that one started, and I'm 99% sure I just need to attach a couple wires and put a new plug in, because it was hardwired before, so I have to put like a plug into it. But the guy that was doing the demo there was not that gentle getting it off the wall.
No.
But it doesn't look like any of the glass is broken.
Yeah.
He just kind of ripped a lot of the wires, so I just have to trace the wires and figure it out.
That still sucks, but it's not as bad.
You're right.
Yeah.
And some of the boxes are like peeled up. Like, they're inside aluminum boxes, and he kind of peeled a couple of them. So... But I think, so that's one of my...
That can be reworked, though.
Yeah. So those are now in the alternative gallery basement.
Yes, they are. They're currently down there.
So that's a project I need to do.
So we are hoping to dedicate a much larger space to it in the near future.
That would be awesome. I mean,
the restoration space.
I would love to eventually have a, like, Lehigh Valley sign museum, and... I don't know if it would be 100% just sign. Like, I would like something that's more of the businesses in the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah.
I know there's a guy on Facebook that has a giant collection of Dorney Park stuff that I think he's getting older and he doesn't know what to do with it. I think he keeps wanting to give it to Dorney Park, but they're owned by a bigger...
They're not going to do the right thing with it.
No. So it would be cool
That's
to,
a different Dorney Park now.
Yeah. It's not the family anymore.
No, hasn't been for a long time.
So it would be cool to, like, go in with somebody like that and say, this is the Dorney Park room of all this memorabilia. And then, like, this is the Hess's room, and this is all the stuff from Hess's. And, I love, like, more of the kind of fun history. Like, there's definitely museums for the beginning of Allentown, 1700s, 1800s.
Yeah.
History, but I'd love to, like, the more pop culture and just stuff that people remember, and, like,
you know what the perfect location would be? The post office over on 5th and Hamilton Streets.
Yes,
but that's actually for sale, which is a god awful shame, because it's one of the best examples of architecture we have left standing in the city of Allentown.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I have concerns that they're going to turn into something dumb, like a restaurant, or I mean, it's obviously too big for just one restaurant, but. That needs to be either a museum or some kind of, like, market, some kind of flea market.
They're going to gut it and make it apartments or
something. That's all they fucking know how to do, man, unfortunately. Yeah. But that would be a perfect location. But in the meantime, though, we fortunately do have a space like this where we can at least store them and make sure they're protected and saved.
Yeah.
At least we have that, and it's bigger than your shed.
Right. Yeah, my shed is running out of space. Yeah, I might have to move some more stuff.
Let me know, man. I'll take care of you. I'll look after you. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but... Yeah. Last year, I think it was over the summer, you were actually kind of apprenticing for plaster restoration for a statue. Fiberglass.
Yeah, so because I love Americana and big stuff, do you know what muffler men are?
Yes, I do.
So just to explain it to the listeners, muffler men are those big, giant fiberglass 20-foot guys. Back in like the 60s, there was a company called American Fiberglass, I think, that would make these giant things to advertise your businesses. And as you're driving down the road, you're going to stop at the big, giant guys. So a lot of them were holding mufflers because they were at mechanics or muffler shops. Once all those businesses kind of went out of business, people were taking them and reappropriating them and repainting them and doing different things with them. And I think, like 10 or 15 years ago, people started calling them muffler men because they used to hold mufflers, but now they're doing a bunch of different things. So I've been following one guy who's been documenting the history of them, which led me to another guy who's making new ones and repairing the old ones. And the one in Coopersburg at the ice cream store there, the guy that I follow who's in Southern Virginia repainted an old one, made it look like an ice cream man, gave him a scoop, and gave him a little ice cream man hat. He designed his own. And I followed him for a long time, and I saw like 5 or 6 years ago, he gave a class. And I messaged them, and I said, any chance you're going to do a class? And they responded and said, no, I don't think he's doing any more classes. And then one day on his Facebook, it said, we're doing a class. I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing it.
Wow.
So in June of last year, I went down to right by Natural Bridge, Virginia, pretty far south. He had a class, which was an amazing class. So you first show up on Saturday, and we get to know each other. Class of about 9 people, all from different places, Rhode Island to like North Carolina maybe. And he taught us how to make fiberglass statues. So we all started with something kind of simple like a mushroom. So I made a mushroom, and it's pretty much, you start out with styrofoam, and you take some tools and shape it into the shape that you want, and then you put tinfoil around that, spray paint it with glue, and then put the fiberglass, like it's the matte stuff that you can really pull apart, and then you paint on or you drip on the resin, and you let that harden, you turn it to the other side, do the same thing. So that was all one day. That night, he also gives ghost tours.
Why not?
Yeah. So he gave us a 2-hour ghost tour that night through town.
And then he turned into a ghost at the end.
It was amazing. There's a lot of history there. So it was a Civil War cemetery that we ended up at. There's one statue, which, I don't really believe in ghosts, but he's like, stare at that head, and what do you see? And I'm like, it looked like that statue's head moved, but I'm not saying that. And somebody else said, did his head just move? I'm like, how did we all see this old Civil War statue's head? So that was fun. So then the next day we figured out a couple more things and how to repair old statues. And that night he also has, and I don't know what to call it. It's either an amusement park. I guess it's an amusement park. But you go there and you walk through one of those tunnels that kind of moves, but the floor stays still, so it looks like you're kind of falling over. And he calls it the time tunnel. So you walk through that, and you get into this wooded area that is filled with robotic Civil War soldiers fighting dinosaurs, like life-size dinosaurs.
That is awesome.
It's all fiberglass that he's built himself.
Wow.
It is the craziest thing. And then you stop at one part, and there's a shack that there's a Bigfoot that jumps out of, and there's a bunch of squirt guns, and Bigfoot starts shooting you with squirt guns, and you start shooting Bigfoot with squirt guns, and then he goes down this line, and like,
this is way more intriguing than I thought. I thought it was just a class.
No, it
was an experience.
He is the wackiest guy.
You came back a different Christopher from this.
He is such an interesting character. His name's Mark Klein. Enchanted Castle Studios is his company. But it's amazing. So at the end of that, he was like, oh, where are you from? Pennsylvania? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to be in Pennsylvania soon. And then I forgot about it. And so like a month or so later, I was like, hey, what are you doing in Pennsylvania? And he's like, oh, you remember that old Roadside America Amish couple somebody bought and moved? I'm like, yeah. And then it got arsoned? Yeah. It's like, I made a new head for it. I'm going to go. And do it. So I went out into Amish country. This Amish kid bought it, moved it to his parents' store. It's in the parking lot. The whole head and part of the chest was burned off. I don't know why somebody...
Yeah, what a dick move.
Yeah, somebody burned it. So he made the head in Virginia, drove it up, and I met him after work one day. He had me do a lot of fiberglass on a hand, and he finished it and repainted it, and so that's back whole. The guy that owns it now put a big cage around it, so hopefully it won't get
so you
burned
got to,
again.
You got to essentially apprentice that day.
Yeah, and he's like, "Hey, you don't even have to pay for the class now." Like, so it was cool to see him repair something, and something that I loved. Like every time I pass Roadside America, I have like a picture of one of my daughters when she was like 4 in front of that statue, and
that's incredible. Man.
It's cool that like we could fix like a little Americana there.
Now, I'm sure some people would ask, like, why bother? Why do you think it's important to, like, preserve and upkeep these pieces?
I love the entertainment. It's art, and people do appreciate it, even though it's goofball stuff. People love it. Like, I love the little Dutch boys that are at the Kutztown Fair that used to be at, what's that restaurant? I'm trying to think. The restaurant in the 80s was like a Pennsylvania Dutch restaurant.
In Allentown?
There was like 5 of them. There was one in Easton. There was one. I'm blanking on the name now.
Not sure.
There was one at the Westgate Mall. The outside restaurant was. I'm blanking on it now. But it was like a chain of Pennsylvania Dutch restaurants, and each one had a little chubby Pennsylvania Dutch fiberglass guy outside.
Yeah.
So we had one in Easton. Oh, this is the worst story. We had one in Easton, and the Easton-Phillipsburg game always happens around Thanksgiving, and we always build a bonfire. So when I was a senior, we built a bonfire. That restaurant went out of business, and it was a diner. Some kids from my class got permission to get the little Dutch boy, put it on the bonfire, and burned
Dude.
it. So, and I always think about that, like, if I really thought about it, I would have stolen it and taken it to my house.
Saved it somewhere.
Yeah. So the only ones that I think are left are the 2 that are at the Kutztown Fair. And to get back to your question is, I was like 3D scanning them because I have this little app. And as I was doing it, people were like kind of trying to walk up and get pictures with it. And I talked to a bunch of people who were like, oh, when I was a kid, I used to go to that restaurant and I used to like take a picture with that thing. And now every time we come to the Kutztown Fair, I have my grandkids get a picture with it and stuff. And
it's become a tradition.
Yeah. So I just love it. I love it for what it is, and I love it for like the Pennsylvania Dutch, and I love it because
it's the culture of this area.
It screams Pennsylvania to me.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said it's art, because a lot of people, like I said earlier about the sign, they would pass by these things and not really think, no second thought about it, right?
Right.
But these things are art.
Oh, yeah.
I think so much in the human mind, we limit art to just paintings on a wall, photography, maybe some sculpture, and that's it. And
Right.
it's like you limit not only what you consider art, but I think the support for people creating other offbeat, oddball mediums of art, which we need.
Oh, yeah.
We absolutely need these things. And it sounds like you're going to continue down this path of, essentially, you've become a preservationist.
Yeah.
Of these materials, and I'm grateful that you're doing it, because you need someone that cares in an odd way to keep these things going.
And you lose a little, like there's some things that are happening in Allentown that are like they're losing. There's a couple blocks that have kind of lost their soul. There's nothing.
That's a lot of blocks,
there.
Unfortunately. Yeah. No,
And
it's really sad. Yeah, you've seen Allentown. You're older than I am. You've seen it longer than I have, and you can see the change, and it's not going in the direction they promised.
Yeah,
and it's sad, man.
Yeah.
Because they're not making room for things like this anymore.
Right.
It's very sterile. It's very corporate.
Right.
And it's no longer a place for oddball creative folks like us. It's not.
And you want it, like, I always think about this, like you want things to like continue and the city to continue and to like improve, and there's some buildings that need to be cleaned up and stuff, but you also need to like keep the history and some of like, once like Hess's went away, it's like, oh, that was like the biggest store in all of Allentown, and then it's gone, and it's
and so many people chalk it up to, oh, you're nostalgic, you want things how you remember. It's like, I'm longing for things that didn't even exist when I was born, like the trolley system, or good public transportation, or a functional business trip on Hamilton. Like, that's what we want to see.
Right.
But you guys keep making these money moves that are only benefiting a few people. It's unfortunate, but at least we're able to save these pieces.
Right.
And, I think I've really come to a point here where I'm not an institution. I'm never going to be an institution. Therefore, I'm not projected forward by institutional thinking. An institution wouldn't do the things that we do.
Right.
It takes a small organization like the Alternative Gallery and people like you that have a passion for these things to make it happen.
Right.
Because no one else stepped in.
Right.
These institutions had the money to do these things and chose not to, or decided they weren't important.
Right.
And then people like you and I, who have no money, have no budget, and do it for free, we somehow get it done.
Right.
It's incredible.
We need more people like you and me, because that's what I'm thinking. Like every time I'm thought about the sign, it's just like, I'm just one dude on a street trying to figure out how to move this myself without any money or help or anything.
Well, you know, since we're coming up on the close of the podcast episode here, why don't you, if you want to, give some advice to anyone that maybe they should do these kind of things and support this kind of work?
There's something that, like, I always think about where, you know, I'll pass something and I'll appreciate it, like that's cool. And then all of a sudden it's gone, and I never thought about it. And like, if you see something like that in your neighborhood, figure out what's going on with it before it's too late.
Yeah, don't assume it's going to last forever.
Like if there's a piece of like public art or something, or there's a sign or there's a building that you really appreciate, and you see like like a foreclosure sign or like a big X on it, like they're going to tear it down, like find out if there's something you can do about it. If you can either save the building or save something from it, that like the soul of the building that can continue on in something else. Like I love the salvage guys that if something is definitely like condemned, that they go in and save like the stuff that like people handmade and just all
I'm one
like
of
the
those
woodwork.
guys.
Yeah,
you're one of those guys now too.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is people have to pay attention to their physical environment.
Right.
Which now with digital technology, it's there's more distractions than ever.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I like, what I said before, where I love to like get out of every town that I go into. I don't want to see that hotel that I'm staying at. I want to get into the neighborhood. Like I love the goofy tourist things, but I also love just normal neighborhoods. And I just want to walk around, and I love walking around Emmaus just to see, because you can tell like, oh, this house was definitely built in the 20s, and then this block was built in the 30s, and it's like, there's a soul to that, where not everything is just torn down and all built up in the same year. Like you need to see the changes, and this is, you can get new plumbing, but the soul of the house is still a certain thing.
And what really hurts me is when they tear down nice things and put up something like really crappy in its place. Yeah. A lot of new construction now, they're not using steel frames. They're using these like crappy wooden frames, like you said. These 2x4s are no longer really 2x4s anymore. Yeah. And we know those things aren't going to last. They're not going to make it 50 years. Right. And the things you're tearing down have already lasted over 100 years with proper upkeep. They'd last hundreds more. Right. But it's, it's cheaper, and they're going to make more money by knocking it down and building this new thing. And it's like, okay, I get it. You want to make money, but that comes at the expense of our culture, of our society. Right. And then in the end, what's left? So it's so important that you do what you're doing. So thank you for it. If anyone hasn't seen the sign, we're going to, of course, post photos on social media, and you can check it out on ChristopherElston.com. You can check out his work. I'm not sure if you have any of the signs up there, but maybe you should. If you don't.
I should, yeah. I should put it on my blog.
Add a little page. You can also come and view it here in person at the Alternative Gallery. We're by appointment only outside of events, so if you're interested in coming checking it out, which I've shown a lot of people that Beachead Comics sign in the basement, and they're like, wow. They're so impressed. A lot of people remember it from when the store was open. Yeah. And others have never seen it, but still have deep appreciation, because they realize after I tell them, this would have been in the trash otherwise. Right. And here it is before you, this behemoth of a piece that was brought here in a boat, saved by our buddy Chris, that is out there looking for more. So once again, we've been chatting with Christopher Elston, a local photographer and videographer who successfully saved the Beachead Comics mural 2 years ago, which now resides here at the Alternative Gallery. You can check out his work at ChristopherElston.com. We need eccentric people like Chris to care about the oddball things out there in the world that often go unseen and underappreciated. But when you take the time to look, those are the most unique things out there. I hope this chat and the tales of Chris's efforts inspire you to take a closer look at the world around you. There's hidden history everywhere. Let's shine a light on it and celebrate it. The simple act of doing so makes people care about our world just a little bit more. And right now, we can sure use some of that. Chris, thank you so much for joining us in Art Bazaar.
Thanks for having me.
It was a blast. I loved hearing all the history and sharing it with our listeners. And not just the listeners now, but this episode's around hopefully forever, so people can continue to hear the oral histories of not just this sign, but so many other pieces of Allentown history here. And if you're enjoying the Art Bazaar podcast, please help us grow by liking and subscribing to the podcast. We want to reach a worldwide audience to help bring attention to all of the amazing creators and unique folks we bring on. They certainly deserve it. And that's all for now. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Art Bazaar.